Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. So just very quickly recap from the last lesson that we took. The statement of the author rahimahullah ta'ala, wa salatu ala man mata min ahli al-qiblati sunnah wal-marjum wal-zani wal-zaniyah wal-ladhi yaqtulu nafsah wa ghayruhu min ahli al-qibla wal-sakran wa ghayruhum as-salatu alayhim sunnah. So that the statement of the author rahimahullah ta'ala, where he said, and to offer the funeral prayer for the one who dies and he was min ahli al-qibla, right? A person that was a Muslim, is sunnah. The person who was stoned to death, the fornicator, the male and the female fornicator or adulterer, the one who commits suicide, and other than them from the people of the Qibla, the Muslims. And the one who was we say he was alcoholic or he drank intoxicants, and other than him. To offer the funeral prayer for them is sunnah. We highlighted an issue specifically with regard to qatilu nafsih, right? The person who commits suicide. There is some misunderstanding a lot of times that some Muslims have. I've heard it personally. And we mentioned the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he mentioned that the person who kills himself with an iron object, then that iron object is going to be in his hand and he's going to be stabbing himself in the stomach with it. خَالِدًا مُخَلَّدًا فِيهَا أَبَدًا. He's going to be in the hellfire doing this forever and ever. Forever and ever. That's the way it could be translated. How did we reconcile between this hadith and the fact of the matter that the person who dies and he's a Muslim, even if he committed a major sin, that he's not going to be in the hellfire forever? What was the understanding, of the correct understanding with regard to that?
The Muslims, as long as they don't commit shirk, they're still gonna river of life as soon as they get out of the hellfire.
Okay, the Muslims who go into the hellfire, they're going to be taken out and they're going to be placed in the river of life. Okay, so what's the correct understanding of the hadith? خَالِدًا مُخَلَّدًا فِيهَا أَبَدًا. They're going to be in the hellfire, they're going to be doing whatever they did. And this is just an example that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned. Some people, they jump off of buildings, skyscrapers. People do it, especially like in Japan and other parts of the world. They jump into rivers, they do other things, right? A drug overdose, whatever. The person who does that, they're going to be doing that in the hellfire. خَالِدًا مُخَلَّدًا فِيهَا أَبَدًا. So what's the correct understanding of this hadith? Yeah, believe it's halal. You make istihlal. If a person, like the brother said, if a person completely despairs Allah's mercy, a person, for example, because of whatever he's going through, because what's the reason why people commit suicide in general? Because they stress, anxiety, depression, right? And people are at different levels, but if a person was to do it believing that it's permissible, that it's okay, that's kufr. That takes a person outside of the fold of Islam. So if a person was to do that believing that is permissible, that is applicable to that person, that they will be in the hellfire forever. But if a person did it out of weak iman, which is the case for most people, especially Muslims, that person would not be in the hellfire forever. And we mentioned the hadith of al-Tufayl. Remember, we mentioned the hadith of al-Tufayl and how there was a person with him. He made hijrah to the al-Medina, and this companion or this friend of his, he got sick. He despaired, and cut his knuckles, right? His hand bled until he died. And then later on, al-Tufayl, he saw him in a dream, and we mentioned the hadith, right? The shahid, the point of reference is what? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgave him, except for his hands, and then after that, the Prophet ﷺ said, Allahumma wali yaday faghfir. O Allah, and forgive his hands. O Allah, and forgive his hands. So this shows what? That even if a Muslim commits suicide, he's not going to be in the hellfire forever. As long as a person doesn't deem it to be permissible, then that wording of the hadith, خَالِدًا مُخَلَّدًا فِيهَا أَبَدًا, the scholars say what it means is he's going to be in the hellfire for a long time. Some of them have said mudda tawila. It's going to be a long time. However long Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants, and that's with the condition that Allah doesn't forgive him. As we mentioned the verse numerous times, Inna Allah la yaghfiru an yushraka bih. Allah doesn't forgive that partners are ascribed to him. Wa yaghfiru ma duna dhalika liman yasha. He forgives less than that for whoever he will. So that's applicable to the one who commits suicide. Naam. So we already began this point last week, so we're going to just reiterate it. قال المؤلف رحمه الله ولا يخرج أحد من أهل القبلة من الإسلام حتى يرد آية من كتاب الله عز وجل أو يرد شيئا من آثار رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أو يصلي لغير الله أو يذبح لغير الله وإذا فعل شيئا من ذلك فقد وجب عليك أن تخرجه من الإسلام فإذا لم يفعل شيئا من ذلك فهو مؤمن ومسلم بالاسم لا بالحقيقة. So Imam al-Barbahārī rahimahullah, he said, no one leaves Islam from Ahlul Qibla. Right? No Muslim leaves Islam until he rejects a verse from the Book of Allah, or he rejects something from the narrations of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or he prays to other than Allah, or he slaughters for other than Allah, or he does something of this. And something of this, then it's incumbent upon you, it's obligatory upon you to expel him from Islam. And if he doesn't do anything of this, he doesn't do any of the things that were mentioned, he's a mu'min, he's a believer, he's a Muslim by name. La bil haqiqa. We can't say that's his reality. So, as we mentioned in the last lesson, what was intended by آثار رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم, the narrations are the ahadith, the authentic ahadith. So Shaykh Fawzan, he says, وقوله أو يرد شيئا من آثار رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أي أنه يكفر. So the statement, and whoever rejects something, right? It's not a must that person rejects the entire sunnah. Right? We already mentioned these people, the Quraniyun. They just take the Quran and they say you don't have to take from the sunnah, right? That's kufr. That's kufr. But the Shaykh or the Imam al-Barbahārī, he said, whoever rejects some of the narrations. What's intended are the authentic narrations, because we know when it comes to the science of hadith, there are narrations, there are ahadith that are authentic, and there are ahadith that are not authentic. So this is with regard to those ahadith that are established. For example, if a hadith is found in Sahih al-Bukhári and Muslim, we say that's what? What's that called? Muttafaqun alayh. It's agreed upon. So if a person was to say, for example, the hadith of Jibreel, when he came to the Prophet ﷺ in the form of a person, he asked him those questions. A person was to say, this hadith is made up, it's fabricated, it's a lie or something like this, right? This is disbelief. If it's a hadith or a hadith that are established, authentic, there's no doubt with regard to the authenticity, then if a person was to reject it, this is kufr. أي فإنه يكفر. Shaykh Fawzan, he said, meaning that he has disbelief. وهذه قاعدة عظيمة عند أهل السنة والجماعة. And this is a tremendous principle with أهل السنة والجماعة. يخالفون بها فئتين. They oppose two factions or two groups. الفئة الأولى الخوارج والغلاة. So the first sect or the first faction are the Khawarij and the Ghulat, those who are extreme. الذين يكفرون بالكبائر التي دون الشرك. Those who declare Muslims to be disbelievers because of major sins that are less than shirk. الفئة الثانية فئة المرجئة الذين يقولون لا يضر مع الإيمان معصية. So the second faction or the second group are the Murji'ah. Who remembers who the Murji'ah are? What was their belief? What's their creed?
They follow Irja, right?
Okay, yeah. Explain it.
All you need is Iman without the action.
Na'am. So they say that Iman is just something in the heart. Or some of them say it's a statement on the tongue. As long as you believe, you're good. As long as you believe, you're good. That's their belief. So they say that Iman is not harmed by sin. A person's Iman is not diminished. It doesn't decrease when he commits a sin. ما دام الإنسان مؤمنا بقلبه. As long as a person believes in his heart. فإنه لا يضره شيء من المعاصي. Nothing harms him in terms of sins. And if a person was just to use, a little intellect, we know that doesn't make sense. We know that doesn't make sense. So if a person was talking to someone who had this belief, and just a kafir, you just take a disbeliever off the street, right, and ask them, the person who goes and robs a bank, and the one who goes and he has a job, a 9 to 5, and he makes an honest earning, are they the same? A kafir will tell you they're not the same. You have one person who's a mujrim, he's a criminal, right? He's harming people and he's causing chaos. And then you have another person who is a law-abiding citizen. No one's going to say in the right mind that the two are equal. So even from just a logical standpoint, it doesn't make sense. So the Shaykh, he says, وَلَوْ تَرَكَ الْأَعْمَالَ كُلَّهَا وَلَمْ يَعْمَلْ شَيْئًا فَإِنَّهُ مُؤْمِنٌ كَامِلُ الْإِيمَانِ. So this is according to the creed of the Murji'ah. They say that if a person abandons all deeds, he doesn't do anything, he's a mu'min, he's a believer, he has complete iman. أما أهل السنة والجماعة فكما ذكر المؤلف أنهم وسط بين الطائفتين. So أهل السنة والجماعة, as the author rahimahullah ta'ala mentioned, they're in the middle, right? They're in the middle between these two extremes or extreme groups. فيقولون الكبائر تختلف. أهل السنة, we say what? Sins or major sins, they differ. They're of different levels. إن كانت من الشرك أو الكفر الأكبرين فإنها تخرج من الملة بالإجماع. So if shirk, polytheism, and disbelief are major, they're major, then this expels from the religion of Islam by consensus of the scholars. And we know when it comes to a shirk and kufr, you have minor shirk and kufr. What's an example of minor kufr? To swear by other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's an example of minor shirk. Slaughtering for other than Allah. That's minor shirk. No. We're talking about minor shirk. In the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned, سِبَابُ الْمُسْلِمِ فُسُوقٌ وَقِتَالُهُ كُفْرٌ. To insult a Muslim is fusuq. Right? It's sinful. Right? And to fight him is kufr. To fight another Muslim is kufr. What's implied? Minor kufr. And even when it comes to the issue that the al-Ikhwan al-Muslimun are always talking about, the ones who rule by other than what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed, what do they use as a proof? وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. Whoever rules by what other than what Allah has revealed, then they are the disbelievers. When you go to the tafsir for this verse, the Mufassirun, they say that this is kufr duna kufr. Right? It's a lesser kufr. And this is with the condition that a person knows that the Sharia is better. He knows that the Sharia is what we're supposed to be ruling by. This is supposed to be our law, our legislation. But because of weak iman, he rules by democracy. It's kufr duna kufr. It's a kufr that's of a lesser degree. Now, so the Shaykh right here, Shaykh Fawzan, he's talking about major kufr, major shirk. This takes a person outside of the fold of Islam by consensus. وَأَمَّا إِذَا كَانَتْ لَيْسَتْ كُفْرًا وَلَا شِرْكًا وَلَيْسَتْ تَكْذِيبًا لِكِتَابِ اللَّهِ وَلَا لِسُنَّةِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صلى الله عليه وسلم وَلَا تَرْكًا لِلصَّلَاةِ وَلَا دُعَاءً لِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ. We're going to come back to this point. وَلَا دُعَاءً لِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ أو ذَبْحًا لِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ وَإِنَّمَا هِيَ كَبِيرَةٌ دُونَ ذَلِكَ فَهَذِهِ لَا يَخْرُجُ بِهَا الْعَبْدُ مِنَ الْإِسْلَامِ. So, if a person does something that's less than shirk, it's less than polytheism, it's less than major disbelief, it's less than denying the book of Allah or the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, abandonment of the prayer, supplicating to other than Allah, slaughtering for other than Allah. وَإِنَّمَا هِيَ كَبِيرًا. Right? It's a major sin that's less than this. A person does not leave Islam خِلَافًا للخوارج والمعتزلة. And this is in opposition to the Khawarij and the Mu'tazila. The reason why I mentioned this and I pointed this out, supplicating to other than Allah. What is supplicating to other than Allah? What is that considered? It's major shirk. Alright, you have a person, I'm going to mention his name, Yasir Qadhi. This was a few years ago. He was talking and he mentioned, I think, 3 positions with regard to the issue of invoking or supplicating to other than Allah. He mentioned 3 positions. And he mentioned a second position, and he said that that was his position, which was what? That if a Muslim makes dua to a person who's dead, that is haram, it's not legislated, it's not permissible, and it's a wasila to shirk. It's a means that is going to lead to shirk, but it's not shirk in itself. He said it's not shirk in itself. Right? This is what, like, the Deobandis and these people, he was taking from them basically. That's their view or their position, right? What's the issue with that? To say that he says it's haram, he says it's haram, it's not legislated, but he said it's a means to shirk and it's not shirk in itself. What's the issue with that? Someone give me a proof. A proof and evidence from the book of Allah. No, give me a proof. I want a proof. أيوة أكمل. Nah. Ahsan. So our brother, he just gave us a verse. What's the beginning again? Whoever supplicates to other than Allah, he has no proof or evidence for it. Then his hisab, أكمل الآية. What's the end of the verse? Then his hisab, his recompense is going to be with his Lord. Now, there's another verse. أوضح من هذه. في سورة الجن. وأن المساجد لله فلا تدعوا مع الله أحدا. And the masajid are only for Allah, so do not supplicate someone beside him or with him. Right? So a person still might say that these verses are not explicit, or they're not explicitly stating that it's shirk. Alright? They're saying it's not explicitly stating that it's shirk. Yes, al-Qadhi, one of the things that he mentioned is that these Muslims, most Muslims who supplicate to Abdul Qadir al-Jilani and all these dead people, right? They don't believe that that person is God. They don't believe that that person is God. Right? He said the pagans of Quraysh, right, the mushrikun of Quraysh, when they supplicated to their false deities, they believed that they were gods. مَا نَعْبُدُهُمْ إِلَّا لِيُقَرِّبُونَ إِلَى اللَّهِ زُلْفَى. They said we don't worship them except so that they can bring us closer to Allah. Right? What's the issue with that? There's a hadith that's clear cut. It's only composed of a few words. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Ad-du'a huwa al-ibadah." That's it. That's the proof and evidence right there. The Prophet ﷺ said, supplication is worship. It's worship. So if a person is supplicating to someone else that's dead, the person's been dead 500 years, 1,000 years, whatever the case is, that person, whether his intention is good or not, because he tried to use this as well. He said, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. You can say the Khawarij have good intentions. When they blow up their bodies and kill innocent people, they have good intentions. It's not about that. A dua, supplication, is worship. So when a person does it, it's a form of worship. So if a person ascribes another partner with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that form of worship, it's shirk. It's shirk. So this is unfortunate. It's a serious issue, and it's very unfortunate because the guy, he graduated from the Islamic University of Medina with a master's degree in Aqeedah. That's the musibah. That's the calamity. Wallahi, he should just throw all of those degrees and certificates away in the trash, because they didn't benefit him. And you have, subhanAllah, the qulub, the hearts of everybody are in between the fingers of Ar-Rahman. Right? This is why we always have to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for guidance. You have clips out there of Yasir Qadhi, how he used to be, refuting the Sufiya, refuting the same people who today he has this lax approach with. He used to refute them, he used to have a longer beard, and now the guy is like, is wishy-washy, has doubt with regard to basic issues. And this is a musibah. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for safety. So the Shaykh Fawzan, he says, وَلَكِنَّهَا تَضُرُّ الْمُؤْمِنِ. So this goes back to the person who commits major sins. So as Ahlus-Sunnah, as people of the Sunnah, we say that major sins don't take a person outside the fold of Islam. But it does harm a person's iman. وَتُنْقِصُ إِيمَانَهُ وَتُضْعِفُهُ. Right? It decreases and it weakens a person's iman. خِلَافًا لِلْمُرْجِئَةِ. This is the opposite of the murji'ah. الَّذِينَ يَقُولُونَ لَا يَضُرُّ مَعَ الْإِيمَانِ مَعْصِيَةً. And this is the opposite of the murji'ah who say that iman is not harmed by sin. فهذا هو المذهب الوسط الذي يحصل به الجمع بين نصوص الوعيد ونصوص الوعد. So this is, an approach or a methodology that's in the middle. It combines between the texts that deal with the threat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His promise. الخوارج والمعتزلة أخذوا بنصوص الوعيد وتركوا نصوص الوعد. So the Khawarij and the Mu'tazila, they took the text with regard to threats. If a person commits a sin or he does such and such, then he's threatened with this. But they abandoned those texts dealing with the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For the believers who are righteous and they do righteous deeds, that He has promised for them paradise and forgiveness and so on and so forth. One of the verses that the Khawarij use to justify their belief, which is what? That if a Muslim commits a major sin, he's a kafir. The verse is in Surah Al-Jinn, وَمَنْ يَعْصِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ فَإِنَّ لَهُ نَارَ جَهَنَّمَ خَالِدِينَ فِيهَا أَبَدًا. Whoever disobeys Allah and His Messenger, then he will have the hellfire and he's going to abide therein forever. What's the wording of the verse? وَمَنْ يَعْصِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ. It's general. It's a general verse. Whoever disobeys Allah and His Messenger, he's going to be in the hellfire forever. And Shaykh al-Sa'di, and this is why you have to go back to the explanation of verses. A person can't just say, I take the Quran, or I take the Sunnah. A person, you have to go back to what the scholars have said with regard to these verses and these ahadith. And Shaykh al-Sa'di, rahimahullah, he says, وَهَذَا الْمُرَادُ بِهِ الْمَعْصِيَةُ الْكُفْرِيَّةُ. What's intended by this is the sin that necessitates disbelief. كما قيدتها النصوص الأخرى المحكمة. As this has been restricted to the verses that are clear-cut. We have clear-cut verses that state that if a person does something that's less than shirk, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might forgive it. وَأَمَّا مُجَرَّدُ الْمَعْصِيَةِ فَإِنَّهُ لَا يُوجِبُ الْخُلُودَ فِي النَّارِ. As for just committing a sin that's not a major sin, or a sin that necessitates disbelief, then this does not necessitate abiding in the hellfire forever. كما دلت على ذلك آيات القرآن والأحاديث عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وأجمع عليه سلف الأمة وأئمة هذه الأمة. And this is indicated in verses in the Quran and ahadith of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, and there is consensus from the Salaf of this ummah and the scholars of this ummah with regard to this issue. The Shaykh, he says, al-murji'ah ala al-aqs. So the murji'ah, they're the opposite. أخذوا بنصوص الوعد وتركوا نصوص الوعيد. So they took the verses with regard to the promise, the promise of Allah, Jannah, being forgiven, mercy, and so on and so forth, and they abandoned those verses or those texts when it comes to the threat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَكِلَا الطَّائِفَتَيْنِ ضَالٌ. So both of these sects or these factions are misguided. وَقَوْلُهُ أَوْ يُصَلِّي لِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ أَوْ يَذْبَحَ لِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ. Or they pray to other than Allah, or they slaughter for other than Allah. يُصَلِّي لِقَبْرٍ يَتَقَرَّبُ إِلَيْهِ. A person prays to a grave to seek nearness to that grave, or the person in that grave. أَوْ يَسْجُدُ لِصَنَمٍ أَوْ يَذْبَحُ لِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ وَيَعْمَلُ شَيْئًا مِنَ الْعِبَادَاتِ لِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ. Or a person prostrates to a statue or idol, or he slaughters for other than Allah, or he does an act of worship for other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَهَذَا مُشْرِكٌ كَافِرٌ. This person is a mushrik and he's a kafir. And this goes back to what we just mentioned. This is why it's very dangerous, for people to just look through different opinions and views of scholars. And even what Yasir Qali did wasn't even correct. There are certain issues is black and white. There's no need to mention the khilaf when it's a clear-cut issue. So this issue, for a person to say that invoking other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not shirk, is very problematic. It's very dangerous. Because when a person does that, he's a mushrik and he's a kafir. And one of our principles is that if a person commits shirk or kufr, and there's no mawani', there's no things that prevent him from being declared a mushrik or a kafir, then he's to be declared that. It's actually mentioned, we mentioned this before, it's mentioned in Nawaqidul Islam. If a person says that a mushrik or a kafir is not such, that is disbelief. That is disbelief in itself. فَهَذَا مُشْرِكٌ كَافِرٌ. This person is a polytheist and he's a disbeliever. خَارِجٌ مِنَ الْمِلَّةِ. He's outside of the fold of Islam. وَمَا دُونَ ذَلِكَ فَأَهْلُ السُّنَّةِ وَسَلْطٌ فِيهِ بَيْنَ الْمُرْجِئَةِ وَبَيْنَ الْخَوَارِجِ. As for that which is less than Ahl Sunnah, we're in the middle. We're in the middle between the Murji'ah and the Khawarij. His statement, alayhi rahmatullah, وَإِذَا فَعَلَ شَيْئًا مِنْ ذَلِكَ فَقَدْ وَجَبَ عَلَيْكَ أَن تُخْرِجَهُ مِنَ الْإِسْلَامِ. And if a person does something of this, then it's obligatory upon you to expel him from Islam, or to say that he's not Muslim. إذا فعل شيئا من ذلك يعني صلى لغير الله أو ذبح لغير الله أو عمل عبادة لغير الله وجب عليك أن تخرجه من الملة. So if a person prays to other than Allah, or he slaughters for other than Allah, or he does an act of worship for other than Allah, it's obligatory upon you to do what? To declare him a disbeliever. What were the mawani' of takfir? The things that prevent a person from being declared a disbeliever. If a Muslim commits an act of disbelief, major disbelief, there are certain things that prevent him from being declared a kafir or a mushrik. What were they? Al-jahl, ignorance. If a person is new to Islam, for example, and they do something, you see a brother, for example, we know it's almost Christmas time, or whatever the case is, right? A person, he goes to a Christmas party, or he partakes in the festivities of the kuffar when it comes to Christmas. He's new to Islam. You can't straight up say that he's a kafir because of that, because he's ignorant. What's another one? Huh? He says he's majnoon. Now you have to ascertain. This is more so for a Muslim judge. Yeah, this is more so for a Muslim judge. But I mean, if a person knows, for example, something else that's applicable to that is also if a person has a sound mind. Perhaps a person is drunk. Perhaps, he's high. Like the guy, Andrew Tate, there was something he said to somebody. It was another Muslim influencer. He said, "I'm your Lord, the Most High." He said, "Prostrate or bow to me, I'm your Lord, the Most High." We know that this guy, right, he's not in his right mind, obviously. But maybe when he said that statement, he was drunk. Maybe he was high. Allah knows best. He's made other statements of disbelief. But the point is what? Perhaps, something's not right in terms of his intellect. Maybe he doesn't have sound reasoning. What's another reason? Al-ikrah. A person is being forced. Like the story of Ammar ibn Yasir, radiyallahu anhu, when the mushrikun used to torture him. They would torture him. And then on one occasion, they told him to insult the Prophet ﷺ. He did it, and then after that he felt bad. He felt bad about what he did. And he went back to the Prophet ﷺ and he told him what happened. And the Prophet ﷺ said, كَيْفَ تَجِدُ قَلْبَكَ? How do you find your heart? How do you find the state of your heart? He said, I find it to be reassured with iman. He said, if they were to do it, then do what you did. فَإِنْ عَادُوا فَعُدْ. If they torture you again, and you feel threatened, you feel like your life is in jeopardy, then do what you did. What else? There was another issue. Another mani', another thing that prevents a person from being declared a disbeliever. The brother says the proof and evidence didn't reach them. Alright, there's something that's connected to that. That's included in ignorance. A blind follower. A blind follower. Taqleed. If a person is in a society where, he just grows up and everybody around him is committing shirk, or acts of shirk or disbelief, it's a possibility that, he might be excused for his ignorance in that situation. There's one more thing. In kana muta'awwilan. Right, a person has a warped understanding of the text. So a person is coming with a misunderstanding, or he's, changing the meaning of text. And we know in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned there's going to be people in this ummah, they're going to deem the wearing of silk for men to be permissible. Fornication. They're going to deem fornication to be permissible, and musical instruments. We've already took this issue numerous times when it comes to the issue of istihlal, saying that something that is haram is wano ma'lum min ad-din bil-darura. Everybody and the mother knows that it's haram. All right? And then someone says it's permissible. It's kufr. It's major kufr. But what's the exception? If a person comes with ta'wil. And this is why the scholars say these people are not considered kuffar, because the Prophet ﷺ said they're going to be people from my nation, min ummati. So this is why they consider from the ummah of Muhammad ﷺ. Even though they consider wearing silk for a man to be permissible, drinking intoxicants, fornication, and ma'azif, and even musical instruments. This is a proof that musical instruments are haram. But the reason the scholars say they're not considered kuffar and they're from the ummah of Muhammad ﷺ, because they do so based upon false interpretation of the text from the book of Allah and the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Na'am. So the Shaykh, he says, وَوَجَبَ عَلَيْكَ أَن تَعْتَقِدَ أَنَّهُ كَافِرٌ. This is with regard to the person who commits a major act of disbelief. It's obligatory that you believe that he's a kafir. And this is after those mawani', those things that prevent a person from being declared a kafir, are removed. وَلَا تَقُولْ لَا يُهِمُّنِي هَذَا. A person is not to say, this doesn't concern me. أو لا أدري عنه, or I don't know about him. بل يجب عليك أن تكفر الكافر والمشرك. Rather, it's incumbent, it's obligatory upon you to declare the kafir and the mushrik to be a kafir. وأن تفسق العاصي مرتكب الكبيرة التي دون الشرك. And that you declare the person who commits a major sin that's less than shirk to be a sinner. لا بد من بيان الحق في هذا الأمر. Right? The truth has to be clarified when it comes to this issue. And the last statement, قوله فإذا لم يفعل شيء من ذلك فهو مؤمن ومسلم بالاسم لا بالحقيقة. And if a person doesn't do any of these things that necessitate disbelief, then he's a mu'min, he's a believer, and a Muslim bil ismi, right, by name, la bil haqiqah, ay fil zahir lana, wa sariratuhu ila Allah, right, in terms of that which is apparent to us, and we leave his, his reality or what's really in his heart to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What was your question?